Hello and welcome to DDOCast episode 510, recorded live on Sunday, March 11th. I'm your host, Patrick. With me this week, we have coming back to the show, Arkat. Welcome back, sir.
Good evening, Patrick. Good to be back.
Yeah, we got a good show lined up for you, especially. But before we get into what's going on this week, let's talk about the screenshot of the week. Audio Slave gets photobombed by a dragon in the 357th screenshot of the week. Nice timing on the dragon there.
That dragon doesn't stay there for very long, so yeah, real good timing.
My guess would be that this is actually a video that then they then like grabbed a specific frame out of. Which,
Right.
If you're trying to get really good action shots for, the screenshot of the week, or your own use or enjoyment, or just for whatever reason, that's actually a really good way to do it. Is to actually record video and then you can get you just pull one frame out and get a really nice action shot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is not an action shot, but it is, as we mentioned, it's a little tricky to get that timing right.
I don't know. It looks like the dragon might be dancing, so it might be an action shot.
That's true, but or he, based on the tagline there, really getting photobombed, it may have been just happenstance that
Right.
the timing happened to be there, which is certainly plausible. In any case, we like to talk about Dungeons & Dragons online nearly every weekend. You can watch us through Twitch, YouTube, the DDO forums, iTunes, or from our website, DDOCast.com. DDOCast is hosted by CyberEars, the awesome podcast hosting network, and shows are usually available within a few days of recording. The next show will possibly be next weekend. There's an outside possibility that I may not be able to get a show in next weekend. But if not, you can stay updated by following us on social media at DDOCast on Twitter. Also, our website, DDOCast.com, we have a calendar that you can subscribe to and figure out when the shows are as I move them around willy-nilly. Also, DDOCast Splat is on there if you trying to figure out when that's going to be. Although that, conveniently, mostly, it either happens at one specific time or doesn't happen at all, so it's not really moving around. On the podcast this week, later we'll have the beginning of our next discussion, which is going to be on Endgame, then and now. So it's going to be taking a look at where Endgame is now, where it's come from, how things have changed, what we liked about those changes, and then kind of at the end, we'll have kind of a discussion on what we'd like to see going forward. This week is part one, which really is the focusing on where Endgame has come from, and what the past of Endgame has looked like up until today. We also have community news, of course, and then we've got a bit of big game news to talk about. So I think let's just jump right into game news. The first thing to mention is Update 38 preview they announced it and then they kind of postponed it. Although if you were following the forums, the only notice you really got was that it's been postponed. So hey, there you go. But they are expecting to open the first preview, Update 38, from Tuesday, March 13th. That would be this Tuesday, through the evening of Thursday, March 15th. So a pretty short window, but it's also kind of the timing that we've kind of become used to as their new preferred, as it were. The first preview is currently planned to showcase the systems changes, which in features of 38, including most notably the Druid Pass, which I thought we weren't getting until much later, but it sounds like it's pretty much ready to go, and Renegade Master Artificer Tree. A second preview for 38 is also expected and will feature both a second pass of the system changes from the first preview as well as the Adventure Pack and associated name loot from that Adventure Pack. But the fate of that is not yet ready to be announced. So this one looks like it's going to be mostly about a couple of system changes and stuff like that, and specifically Druids and Artificers. And also probably Update 38 balance changes. Here we go. Balance changes, the word that most gamers hear as nerfs.
That's how I'm hearing it.
Well, the reason why you're here is because you are one of the monkiest players that we have on our show, from our rotation of guests. So, and it's really kind of mostly going to focus on monks as we get into it. So here we go. So this came from SteelStar. These are some upcoming changes that we will see in Update 38's first Lemania. And, obviously assuming nothing changes, they would become live. But let's assume that some things may change, tinker here and there. So they've put quite a bit of time lately into gathering DPS data. That is in part to evaluate where builds are when on an even footing, and to find outliers both high and low. Evaluate why there's outliers and bring those in as necessary. That in turn allows us to better balance groups. They can make better overall melee buffs if they don't have 1 to 2 builds doing triple the damage of the other 98% of the builds. They'll talk a little bit about the tests and then kind of outline the changes that are coming. So I think we'll take this in chunks here. That first part sounds reasonable to me. If they want to make overarching changes that are going to affect lots of builds, those builds kind of need to be relatively similar in terms of scope and power. Of course, the awkward thing about making any kind of DPS data is there's a lot of things to kind of figure out that aren't always related to DPS either, like survivability and flexibility and stuff like that. So it's not an even footing. There's also certainly some challenges. For instance, it's difficult to compare DPS from a rogue to, say, a fighter, or actually, let's say a rogue and a monk. If they're fighting something with kidneys, the rogue's going to have more of an advantage. If you're fighting something that doesn't have kidneys and doesn't take critical hits, monks actually typically lose less of their damage from critical hits because they have a smaller critical profile, and they don't lose their sneak attack damage. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to DPS testing as well. But anything you want to say about the first paragraph there? You want to save it for the rest?
It's the whole philosophy of them looking at outliers, and I get they want to get rid of or at least attack what it is that makes an outlier an outlier. I get that, and but let's just go on. Let's just move on.
All right,
well, I'll get to my rant later.
So they tested an extensive number of builds, over 40 in terms of DPS. There again is another limitation. There are way more than 40 builds. But, Trinket can do. A Pure 20 monk using hand ramps with most of its points in Xintao and the rest in Henshin did significantly, unquestionably more damage than any other build they tested. It was not even close, more than 30% above anyone else. Far below that, the number 2 build had most of its levels in monk. The number 3 was another pure monk, and number 4 had a significant number of monk levels as well. The number 7 build in terms of raw DPS was a 20 monk Henshin Mystic using a quarterstaff. No monk builds they tried ranked below that. So what he's saying is, out of 40 builds that they tried, the monk ones that they tried were all in the top 7.
Okay, so may I just raise a few questions about this particular paragraph?
Sure.
So, all right. So yes, and a duality wielding Henshin, or rather, Xintao monk, with using points in Henshin Mystic, is much higher than everybody else, and I can understand that. But in my feeble hands as a monk, I'm sure I'm doing a lot of damage, but I don't, I'm not doing symbiont, damage at 2,500 points, on a normal punch. But I don't want to get into his build. It's totally exceptional and unrealistic to use as a measuring stick for other Xintao monks. But I wanted to quote, but about this particular paragraph, I want to know what the number 3, what number 3 was. It says it's another monk. Yeah. What is that? What the heck does that mean?
Sure.
Are you talking about like the ninja spy? It has to be talking about a ninja spy.
That it's going to be using a lot of Henshin, because that's the thing that they're going to supposedly target later.
And that's right. And it all comes down to, I think, the easy first 3 cores of melee power available to Henshin monks. The 10 melee power for the first, basically 11. Yeah. So, that's where I think that's where the large part of the issue is. I don't necessarily agree with what Steel Star and SSG's cure is, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I would definitely say that my monk, who is 20 monk, I would say I actually I like the Henshin core, just because I like the key generation from it. So I've typically always have most of my points in Henshin. I would not say that it felt like it was overpoweringly more powerful than a lot of my other characters. But again, I mean, this is a DPS. We're talking pure DPS here. My sense comes from a more holistic point of view of my monk feels a little bit like a glass cannon, which in melee is not exactly a great concept.
No, and in Reaper especially, it's not.
So having said that, I don't necessarily have the sense that my pure 20 monk was overperforming all my other characters by 30%, but I also don't sit there and do a bunch of DPS tests, which is a very small part of what my sense is. So, some good news out of all this. The next paragraph is, in addition, the process of this balance check to help us identify a bug where characters who were 2-weapon fighting, as well as those using hand wraps, were receiving double strikes, offhand attacks, and offhand double strikes at a far lower rate than intended while moving. They have fixed that internally. For comparison, most fighting styles deal similar damage numbers while moving versus standing still. 2-weapon fighting on live deals about 40% less damage while moving because of this bug. So that will be fixed going in with update 38. So that's good.
It's good, but as a melee character, chasing around, a monster who's running is generally not what you want to do. I mean, it's generally not helpful. It's the ranged characters, it's the crowd control wizards and all that stuff that are supposed to be taking care of the moving things.
Okay, sure, but at the same time, I would tell you that if you're going to stand there with your feet growing roots in the ground, you're losing a lot of the combat. Even in melee and something that's not moving, you should be moving a lot as well. Yes, and I've seen some people try to couch this as, oh, well, you're taking all this stuff away, but you're giving this. Like, well, I don't think that's what he's trying to get at here. I think it's more like this is saying, as part of this, we've discovered this. We're sharing that with you, and we're fixing it, which is good. We should fix that. 40% less damage while moving is not good.
Yeah, if it's a bug, then bugs should be fixed. Absolutely.
Based on the above, they're confident that an adjustment is needed. We understand that melees are not in the strongest place right now in the top-end meta. They aren't trying to kick melee when it's down. Rather, we're trying to bring the melee outliers in so they can better balance melee as a group. Consider this some of the first steps that will allow us to better make the other ones down the road, such as improving melee defense. Good theory, I think.
Yeah, I get the point where they're trying to basically make everything equal, and then therefore they can make changes and keep everything equal as they make the changes. I understand. I don't
think they're trying to necessarily make everything equal.
Oh yeah,
right. Like it's if I think of it in terms of sound, right? Like you've got different dynamics and stuff, but if you've got something that's really, really loud, and you want to bring everything in your soundscape up by double, if you've got something that's already 3 times louder than everything else, that thing's going to get exponentially louder.
That's also going to get louder, right?
Yeah. Right. So I think that's kind of what that's kind of the way that I've been thinking about it. I think that's kind of one of the things they're trying to address.
Okay.
So the theory to me makes a lot of sense. I can understand that a lot of people probably don't feel like the application of how they're addressing that theory is very fun. But let's talk about that. So hand wraps. You've likely seen some threads by now about duality, the raid hand wraps from Ravenloft. We'd initially given Ravenloft hand wraps damage dice akin to 2-handed weapons in the pack. They had some reasons for it at the time, but we missed the mark on this one, especially with hand wraps benefiting disproportionately well from the increases in internal damage dice. They're planning on dropping their dice from 1d6 plus 6 to 1d6 plus 3. In addition, the legendary Morning Lord and Night Mother hand wraps will drop from 1d6 plus 4 to 1d6 plus 2. Duality will still be the strongest hand wraps and are likely stronger than most of the hand wraps out there, but not by as much. To give a little bit of perspective on that, so if you were to take the average dice, the duality is going from 9.5 damage per hit to 6.5 damage per hit. So that gives you kind of, and that's before a bunch of multipliers and stuff like that, but that gives you an idea of how much we're talking about there.
Yeah, the 33% drop.
Yes,
roughly.
Which is significant. And I know there's probably a lot of stronger feelings about this one. One thing I would say that I had a conversation with someone before the show, not too long before the show, was talking about, well, don't give us these nice shiny toys and then take them away. Well, that's not really what they were trying to do, and they have acknowledged that that's not what they want to do. They try to err on the smaller side of things so that they can, because boosting things as opposed to nerfing them is generally more accepted. But, they're going to miss the mark, and they did. That's what they're saying. So,
what I wonder, and it seems like when they try to fix something, they like to fix, quote unquote, fix things with a hammer as opposed to a scalpel. So maybe it might be, and this will come up again later in our chat. It seems like maybe a place to start would have been maybe make it a D6 plus 4, and then drop the Morning Lord to a D6 plus 3. Make an incremental change first, and if it still is not, if things are still quote unquote overperforming, then you can make another incremental change. I mean, it's not unprecedented. They did that with the Warlock when they, took away the when they reduced the amount of temporary hit points that you got from Enlightened Spirit, from 12D, 12 times your con modifier. I think they dropped it to something. They dropped it and then they dropped it again. I think I could be mistaken, but the point is, drop it initially a smaller, at least a small amount, and then if it's still bad, you can drop it for another small amount. It isn't like you're, totally crushing the brand shiny new, hand wraps that you made right off the bat.
Sure. Let me see this though. Because we said that you're losing about 33% of the damage. I mean, they said that the highest build was more than 30% above everyone else. So those two numbers are in line with each other.
They are in line. They're in line, Patrick. But again, we're comparing a normal person, normal, Shinto monk,
with the highest performing one,
with a ridiculously, an outlier, ridiculous outlier. I just have problems with that. I mean, nobody, this guy who posted the video was, had the extra 75 power from the prowess set of filigrees. I mean, he was hitting all the right clicky type things, in the correct order. I mean, he had all the best equipment. He had all the best, the past lives, all that stuff. This guy was totally exceptional build, and he was doing everything right to get such ridiculously high numbers. Now, I'm never ever going to get that, and I doubt most people will ever get that.
Yeah, and you're right. There are people that are not having that experience that are going to feel this pretty harshly, and I, trying to play a little bit of a game of pointing things out too, just not so much that they're necessarily like saying that the 30% is the same, not because I'm trying to defend that as much as point stuff out for a better, a more informed conversation.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely think they probably could have stepped that down a little bit more. I would say too, as a point of caution and a counterpoint, is that to keep in mind is they can always go back up by 1 too. So
that's true. That's a fair point.
So we'll have to see where it ends up. I can only presume that those numbers are backed up by their data, which they're not going to share for a variety of good reasons. If no other reason than, I think he actually said this later, but they're not going to share their DPS numbers because that's just kind of folly. To be honest, because they will get so over criticized.
That's right. They can't win. They can't win whatever they do, Patrick, and people will pick their methods apart,
Yes.
ad infinitum.
Moving on to, I think the hand wraps part is probably what I felt was probably the more controversial part of the kind of these three things that we're going to really get into. The next one was Henshin Mystic. So Henshin Mystic currently gets 75 melee power in its tree. That's a lot more than other trees get, and is pretty evenly distributed through its cores. We're of the opinion that this makes both pure monks and monk splashes disproportionately strong, especially given the other benefits of being a monk, and they're planning to alter it from 10 for each core and then 25 at the end to 3 for each core to 15 at the end. Which, what does that come out to? 30?
It's 15. Yeah, 30. Yeah,
so
75
they're going
versus
from 75 to 30.
Yeah.
So, and the net effect on Henshin Mystic builds is that their DPS falls in line with most other two-handed fighting builds. They're hoping to do a little further analysis of two-handed fighting in general after update 38. So what they're saying is they're basically trying to bring that down to that kind of generic baseline area, so they can kind of look at things in a bigger scope and picture.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of good ideas of how to kind of counter something, because there's a lot of people saying, okay, well, you're directly and affecting and trying to kind of point at this Henshin Mystic build and hand wraps, but this is going to really impact quarterstaff users, which are going to generally be really involved with Henshin Mystic, because that's the quarterstaff tree. Should some of this melee power be limited to quarterstaffs? I think that's a great idea to a point. I think there's definitely something to be said about should an enhancement tree be getting 75 melee power? Because I don't think any other tree gets anywhere close to that.
Nope, they don't.
Then that's a lot. So I definitely understand the reasoning there. I think I liked something that someone was pointing out. I've seen a couple people point out, actually, is this idea that, well, maybe you should give some of that melee power back to just using a quarterstaff, which seems reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
What your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I know, and I think what people are I agree that I do agree that it is too easy to dip into the Henshin Mystic and get a disproportionately large amount of melee power. So I think they do need to do something about that. And I think and you've already mentioned what I think the fix is that all those core melee power should go to, you should add the words and make the actual code changes to, while wielding a quarterstaff, you get 10 melee power. So it should be something.
I would say make it less than 10, but
well, here's the thing.
Like if you went to 5, like 5 and then 20 for quarterstaffs, I mean, because remember too, the reason why I say that is they talked about they checked 40 builds and quarterstaff was number 7. So it's still on the higher end of things.
So let's talk about that then. So
sure.
Quarterstaves are simple weapons, and they do a D6 of damage, and they have the worst crit profile you can have. You do ×2 on a 20. So it is by far,
which interestingly enough is the same as hand wraps in general, which is the higher point.
But they get but they get the advantage of being able to use 2-weapon fighting, so they get a lot of extra attacks.
You can make the argument that quarterstaffs get to use 2-handed fighting.
Which is glancing blow damage, and that's, and the glancing blow damage can't critical. Glancing blow damage can't critical, and there's other things that glancing blows can't do. So
let's not make this a debate about 2-weapon fighting versus 2-handed fighting.
Exactly.
But,
yes. But my point is that quarterstaves are not good weapons. Before the Henshin Mystic came out, quarterstaves were a flavor weapon only. So if you when Henshin Mystic came out with the melee power cores, quarterstaves became a viable, usable, decent weapon. That's the only reason why I've got a Henshin Mystic quarterstaff user. I don't play him all that much, but if I didn't have the Henshin melee power, I wouldn't play him at all. So,
I do want to. Just as a technical point, I do want to point out that quarterstaffs became more popular too with Thief Acrobat. Just so the Thief Acrobats out there don't like, hey, what about that? So I do want to mention that. Yeah, I definitely feel you, and I think it's pretty darn fair to say that there's not a overpopulation of quarterstaff builds running around.
No, there
Certainly.
isn't. There isn't.
And I think you could also make the argument that there's probably not an overpopulation of melee hand wraps pure 20 monks running around either.
A lot of them are throwers and stuff, yeah.
And, going even a step further, melee builds are not generally the lion's share of the population right now. That I think we can agree that it tends to be ranged characters and throwers and archers, which makes this next one that we're going to talk about, next thing that they're doing, a little bit more relevant, which I think this is probably a better targeting if you want to look at like a really bigger picture than what we're talking. Because I mean, this is mostly talking about melee builds. This one is what we're talking about is really going to affect more range builds more than melee builds. But if you look at a bigger picture, one of the things that's acknowledged in this is that melee builds are not in. They need to be in a better place as a group, particularly when you're talking about defense. Again, something that was acknowledged, the defense. Small PSA of something I mentioned before. I think a great place to start would be, make it so that every single Reaper doesn't slow down your melee attack speed. That disproportionately hits melee as compared to ranged.
Sure.
Anyway, getting back to the main point. So the other thing they're looking at doing is Vishtani weapon versatility. So if you don't know what this is, it's an ability in Vishtani tree that I think is tier 2, tier 3, somewhere in that range.
I don't know.
But what it does, it lets you use melee or range power, whichever one is higher for. Right now, it's for anything. If you're using a weapon, you can just use the higher of the two.
Yeah, melee or ranged. Yeah.
So during their DPS testing, they took a look at how this ability impacts builds. They come to the conclusion that ultimately this ability is detrimental to game balance and our ability to make adjustments differently among melee and range builds. They're planning on making it apply only to daggers and throwing daggers, as it was in the earliest drafts of that ability, which makes complete sense to me. I like this one as well. I think for verisimilitude purposes, it's a dagger tree, so these powers should affect daggers. Yes. And, that makes sense. And I think I even made a comment when they changed that to be everything. I was like, well, that's kind of weird. It's a dagger tree. Shouldn't it stay to daggers?
Yep.
And I think that, melee power is a lot easier to get than range power, generally speaking.
Yep.
So that's going to be probably help bring some of those outlying builds back a little bit as well. So,
if I'm reading this right, Patrick, is that they're not actually taking away the melee or ranged power away. They're just redirecting it to the proper weapon.
Yes, in that tree.
Okay.
Although that thing itself doesn't actually give any melee or range power. I think there is some in that tree, just some areas where there's some of that stuff.
Right.
But this is just saying that using melee or the higher of melee or range power will only apply to daggers and throwing daggers. Right. And probably the thing that I am most critical about it with all of these changes is why did we not have that be true in the first place? Why did that even get changed in the first place? I think that was kind of a silly thing that they did anyways.
Yeah.
And it certainly, I think, is going to... I agree. I think it's kind of detrimental. It's a little silly in a lot of ways. Okay, there is a kind of fourth set of changes. This is... but this is not a nerf, it's a boost. So looking at Epic Destiny boosts. With the above changes, they're planning on making the following changes to Epic Destiny cores. This is not meant to solve the inherent issues in a lot of these Destinies, only make them slightly more appealing and to introduce a minor melee buff into Epic. So Fate Singer is going from +4 melee power to +10. Jeez.
Yeah, that's quite a jump.
In Fate Singer?
Quite a jump. I guess they want to make their swashbucklers, a little bit more powerful, I guess.
That was kind of surprising. Grandmaster of Flowers is also going from 4 to 10. So, they're going to get a little bit of, let's just assume that if you're that Henshin Mystic hand wrap build, you're probably going to be in Grandmasters of Flowers. So going from 4 to 10, you're getting, 36 melee power back?
36.
So I think you're actually going to end up almost where you were.
That's
level 20.
That's true, but a lot of the Shintal hand wrap users are in Legendary Dreadnought as far as an Epic Destiny is concerned. I am
Dreadnought. No, that's totally fine. And I'm not trying to throw a bone or anything. I'm just pointing it out.
Well, what this is doing, it's at least making me consider going back to Grandmaster of Flowers.
Which I think is good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a much more viable option, and I like that.
Legendary Dreadnought, this is funny. So it's actually going to be unchanged. Another spike in their DPS testing showed that with few exceptions, most melee builds are best served by being in Legendary Dreadnought. It does not need help. It should remain competitive even with these changes. All right, we'll see that. Shadow Dancer is also going from 4 to 10 melee power per core. Fury of the Wild is going from 3 to 6. Primal Avatar is going from 4 to 10. Bear in mind that they also mentioned that this is targeted for the same release as the Druid Pass, where tree form glitching is planned to be fixed. Divine Crusader is going from +2 to +3, and Yielding Sentinel is going from +4 to +5. So there you go. So, and then again, at the end, so as said above, these changes are a step. They aren't meant to address the issues with melee defenses, ranged magic DPS, short of the Vistani change, or anything beyond trying to make a more balanced melee ecosystem. They have the above changes completed internally and have been running comparison tests. The essential impact so far seems to be the following. A standing hand wrap monk DPS falls fairly dramatically, but they're still at top end of single target melee DPS, just not by as much. They're a lot closer to other builds. Conversely, moving hand wrap monk DPS rises somewhat as the bug fix to 2-up and fighting outpaces the other DPS reducing changes. Miscellaneous monk builds drop somewhat depending on the level of previous investment in Henshin cores. Most 2-up and fighting builds deal about 40% more damage while moving due to the bug fixed. Otherwise, remain about where they are. Henshin Mystic DPS falls fairly dramatically to about where other 200 fighting builds currently are. 200 fighting builds are themselves a little bit below most single weapon fighting or 2-up fighting builds in terms of single target DPS, but glancing below damage should put them right in the mix with other builds and overall damage. I think you would probably take a different belief on that.
Yeah, I do.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I fully believe it either. I think you made a good point that it's not critical damage.
The quarterstaves are a subpar two-handed fighting weapon.
Well, we're talking here too, just like generally 200 fighting builds are a little bit behind single open fighting and 2-up fighting.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I would agree with. That's certainly my experience. You can make an argument that 2-up fighting or two-handed fighting you can get the cleaves and stuff going. You can do that with 2-up fighting too. So it's not like that's any different. And you could also, I think, make a really strong argument that in terms of DPS and where it really matters is going to be single target because that's your boss fight.
That's right. I mean, that's where the hard things are, Patrick, is the boss fights, and those are generally, unless you're talking about like dealing with the shambling mounds and old Baba's hut. I mean,
even those are single target though.
That's right, they are. But for the most part, it's just the one big baddie at the end.
I think that's certainly a viable thing to make, but it is important to remember too that again these changes, like I said, they're not addressing melee defenses or where melees fall relative to ranged or magic DPS. It's really about in the scheme in the myopic view of melee builds. Let's try to make them kind of comparative to each other before trying to take melee and move it up to
right. I guess range. Really the other shoe that has to fall is what do they do? How do they attack the defense, the defensive problems of melees, which I'm really super curious. I mean, if they, I guess if monks are much better, MRR, if their cap is raised to 100, let's say. In pajamas, maybe that makes the people who are using duality or hand wraps and who got horribly nerfed, maybe that makes us feel better. I don't know. I have to see.
I think the biggest challenge you're gonna have, because you're talking about balancing melee versus ranged or magic, is melee gets hit more often.
That's right.
So the biggest defense that range has is they don't have to get close, and the fact that a lot of range builds are able to outpace DPS wise melee builds makes for a problematic ecosystem. Have a great answer for that. Again, I would say that you can start by making it less penalizing to be getting hit just in general, compared to getting hit fewer times would be one thing. But there's, I think if you're gonna really talk about it in terms of high end difficulty, start thinking about Reaper. I think there's some low hanging fruit in terms of Reapers, of doing things like making it so Reapers don't just slow your attack speed and movement speed all the time. Or there could be easily some, introduce some new Reapers that maybe are more penalizing to melee and are more penalizing to ranged. Would be options as well. So
you mean less penalizing to melee and more penalizing to range?
I mean if you take as an across the board, say that, let's make all of the ones we have right now less penalizing to melee, but then have one that you could make one that is has some sort of defense, maybe a high guard or something like that. So you're intentionally encouraged not to melee it. You could also make one that, something that's similar for one that is intended to not be attacked by ranged.
Right.
Or be penalizing to range specifically, or you can make one that's penalizing to spell casting specifically.
Gotcha. No, that would be fair.
And some of that, I'll actually go into more detail on that in our Endgame discussions over the next couple of weeks as well. There you go. So, anything else you want to say about that stuff before we kind of move on and cruise through the rest of the stuff?
No. I think we've beaten this like a dead horse. So let's move on.
The last thing I'll say is take a breath. We've been through this kind of thing before. It's the sky is not falling.
Not yet. It isn't.
Not yet. The DPS is, but the sky is not.
Right.
Anyways, DDO.com updates. They've taken the step in the longer-term effort to update DDO.com. Among the changes, the community rules have migrated to the DDO forums. They can be accessed in the top tab row of the forums, in addition to the forum categories at the top of the forum list. The link to the community rules on DDO.com remains unchanged. The DDO logo was updated. I must not have looked at it close enough because I didn't actually really notice it.
Yeah, it looks a lot more like the Mr. Ravenloft theme. So.
Oh, is that what it is?
Themed one, yeah. It's black and silver kind of thing.
Okay. They streamlined the old media tab to be the news tab, which was the only section being updated regularly anyway. The old links do, however, remain reactive. In general, they didn't delete any links. They just kind of maybe moved them around. They removed some of the most outdated information in the game and moved the BAVIP section to the game tab. The community tab is renamed forums and direct links to the forums. They removed the need to drop down here to help with mobile browsers and move the community rules as stated earlier. The store tab was removed and replaced the DDO Market tab, links directly to DDO Market. The download and play free now tabs remain unchanged. In the future, they'll be working to update the content on outdated pages and make some other changes to the website more friendlier to a wider variety of devices. Makes sense. I mean, it's really easy to forget that when DDO.com and DDO launched, everyone wasn't carrying around a computer in their pocket.
No, there was no such thing as being able to view the forums on your phone.
Was the iPhone even out? I don't even know if it was.
No, I don't think so.
Go back and listen to our 10-year. I think when we did the 10-year anniversary, I did a couple things about that. I think one of the things I mentioned was the iPhone didn't even exist yet. Right. It's kind of wild.
Hey, can we say something real quick about this section? I do like the fact that they changed what used to be called the community guidelines. They've renamed them community rules, and somebody said this on the DDO forums where guidelines didn't necessarily have to apply to anybody in particular or at all, because a guideline is just a guideline. There's nothing fast and hard about it. But when you call something a rule, that generally means a rule is a rule and it applies to everybody. So it sort of gets away from, forum moderators from, being able to treat other people differently from others. And so I kind of like the implication that we have a rule now, so everybody's going to be treated the same or equally.
I don't have anywhere near as much forum experience as you, but I kind of would have assumed it would have been more or less the same thing. But sure, it's an interesting point for sure. Let's see. This made me laugh, so I threw it in the show notes. In case you were wondering, the commemorative D12, it does function like a teleport, which means it can misfire and send you up into the marketplace.
Yep.
And kudos to Cordovan for his response to that.
Sometimes you roll a 1.
That was a great response.
Yes, absolutely.
It was pretty. Or sorry, it's commemorative D20, isn't it? I don't know why I wrote D12. Commemorative D20.
Well, no, it's a commemorative D12 because it's the 12th anniversary of DDO.
Is it a D12? I thought it was a D20.
It's D12.
Oh, well, my mistake. That makes my question from a couple weeks ago kind of silly now.
What was that?
What? Well, there's like the Chronicle comment was make up your own question. So where does a D12 take you? Because I thought it was a D20. Mm-hmm. Anyways, bonus days. You can get 20% challenge rewards. Through March 11th. That would be today if you're listening to this live. If you're listening to this published, then you're too late. As is often the case with bonus days anyways. But it does include the anniversary event, which also ends today, March 11th. However, the outfit, which you can actually see in the screenshot, the commemorative outfit cake, you need to as long as that character logs in before April 1st, I believe.
Yes, that's
you
correct.
will get the cake. You do not need to turn the cake in.
Nope.
It just gives you the cake. So if you have characters that you don't have the cake on, make sure you log them in before the end of the month.
Right. You get the cake. Assuming you get the cake, then you can eat the cake at any time.
Right.
Even after April 1st, and you can get your choice of the outfits or the new cosmetic.
He may not appreciate this a whole lot, but look, if you also run into that situation where you have a special set of extenuating circumstances and you're not able to do it, you can probably submit a ticket or ask the help desk. My experience is, and I know there was at least one individual person that contacted me to say, hey, is there any way this happened? Because there was someone who missed out on the lion because of a very special set of extenuating circumstances. If that's you, you can probably get in touch with Standing Stone Games, and I bet you they will hook you up. They're pretty reasonable in that sense.
It would suck. It would suck if you were like on a tour in Iraq and you couldn't log into DDO, and you came back and you found out that you missed something. That was actually pretty cool. So yeah, I think that's a good policy.
I can't promise anything, but I'm pretty sure if you get in touch with someone from Standing Stone Games, they'll help you out in that regard. Mm-hmm. It might take a little while, and I wouldn't use the in-game GMs or anything like that. But if you're listening to this a couple of weeks down the road, and this is you, and you were in the hospital or you were serving overseas or something like that, get in touch with them. I'm pretty sure they'll help you out. I know they've done it in the past, so it's a possibility at least. Store news. So hey, Ravenloft is in the DDO store now. I'm not sure if ASMR or the Scourge are yet. They were working.
Yes.
Are they?
Scourge was put in the store late last week.
Okay. So the points were what they said in the FAQ when the Ravenloft came out. But ASMR is $13.95. Mr. Ravenloft, the content is $24.95, and the Scourge of the Undead Iconic is $12.95.
How do you do that? Why do you charge 100 fewer turbine points for the Iconic?
Because it has to start at a specific class.
Okay, there you go. So there's a disadvantage there.
That would be my guess.
Okay, good point. I'll buy that for $1.
Well, actually, you'll buy that for 1,295 turbine or DDO points, but yeah. The sales for the week is Honor Your Guild. You get 30% off of Astral Shards and Guild Renown Elixirs, and 50% off of Guild Charters and Airship Beacons through March 15th. The coupon code gets you a lasting potion of resist fire, plus 10 times 5, with the coupon code RESFIRE, R-E-S Fire, through March 15th. And that will take us to community news. The 274th Chronicle, Mops Entertainment, pondered a theoretical DDO expansion. That was kind of fun, actually. Some of the things he talked about was having a dwarf. So he was talking about an expansion that would take us to Corvair, I believe. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that he pitched were having a Dwarven Artificer Iconic race, which I thought was actually a good choice.
I think a dwarf iconic of some sort is an excellent choice.
Well, and I think it's interesting when you look at the iconic races. The race clash combination is not generally what you would think of as the first combination, right? So I think a Dwarven Artificer is actually and he made a very compelling case for that. He also introduced the Shifter race in his mock expansion, so it was kind of fun. See, Fumbles and Fames streams DDO in addition to pen and paper gaming regularly on Twitch. They are also on the DDO stream with that. Draculetta began streaming DDO as well. I'm guessing he just wants to prove to everyone that his random loot rolls are really that bad.
Actually suck.
Yeah. The guild for the week. Goda Voss is a level 75 guild on Argoness, looking for players from Malaysia or anyone else who plays around the GMT +8 time zone. The guild is looking for English-speaking players. They have Kraken, full buffs, and more. The comment for the week. DDO has iron, clay, stone, and other golems, but what kind of golem should DDO have? I'm going glass.
Oh, man. Glass golems, huh? How about...
A bleed guard?
God, I have no idea. I didn't even see the question. I'm completely flummoxed by it. Well, there's the amber golems. I like the amber golems. Those are really cool. Oh, anyway.
Let's see. Fansite news. We got a shout out for our part 2 of our Curse of Strahd strategy guide. Again, I'm disappointed that Jerry didn't use the strategy guide pun, but such is life. I know it's pretty bad. DDO players news. Tortured the damsels in DDO. I thought that was the other way around, actually. I thought the damsels were torturing Track. The damsels DDO got an invitation for dinner. Very Bad Guild had a small problem. City wrote about the DDO user experience in a new blog post. Evil Squeegee and friends recently streamed DDO on his 3,000+ follower Twitch channel.
Are Evil Squeegee and Evil Beaker related?
I don't think so. Note that Evil Squeegee is not safe for work. Sip partied hard in the anniversary dungeon. Ban VP got a case of troglodytes. Mickey continued her rating talk in a new blog post. It's Good to Be King. Had that episode. You can see who's king there. Brighter Days Ahead tonight streams every Thursday evening on Twitch. And Paul Nye has one last quest, so you can check that out as well. Let's see. And Cordovan ran through the anniversary dungeon in this week's Weekly Wednesday lunchtime live stream if you want to watch that.
Yeah, my wife was in that group.
Oh, yeah? That's neat.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other stuff. Other blogs. City DDO had What He's Playing Now blog, so he talked about some of the builds that he's playing right now. So if you're looking for builds, it's probably a good place to go. Let's see, other stuff. Gaming SF had an interesting blog post on failure conditions. So he was talking about specifically Faithful Departed, but quests that have failure conditions. Kind of interesting read.
Oh God, I have the very first time I ran through Faithful Departed basically prevented me from running through it for like another 5 or 6 years until they changed the failure conditions.
It's a lot easier now.
Oh yeah.
It is still kind of it can be kind of tricky. If you don't know what you're doing, it can still be pretty easy to fail. Let's see. And Mickey's also talked about raids for week 65, and one of her characters is running Reaper 2 for the first time. Let's see, DDOCast news. DDOCast Splat is still going. We finished the Veil last week. I think we're heading to the Reaver's Refuge this week, so more death will be ensuing, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Lightning Post. Rose came in, and so this was referring to the natural weapon fighting feats, which we talked about last week, which are, shall we say, slightly less enthusiastically interesting than they were before. She said, I don't understand why they can't just make the natural fighting feats innate feats like 2-weapon feat fight line that Rangers get. Why is it so hard to do? Also, why the heavy focus into multi-classing. She only does pure builds, and it's really sad that a multi-class character can be stronger than me in the class I specialize in. I agree.
Yep.
They are so wrapped up in worrying about how people with multi-class with Druid that they lose focus on what makes the darn class good and fun to play. Initially super excited about the patch for Druids, my absolute favorite class, but now when it comes out, I'll check it out when she gets the chance. So, yeah, it's true.
Yep.
Our question for the week comes from... did you want to jump in on the Druid
I
stuff?
know, and I agree with her. I play mostly pure builds, but I occasional multi-class, and that was one of the really bad things about about Dungeons and Dragons version 3.5 is this just sheer combination and number of multi-classes you could do to really get the absolute, absolute most eke out the every last ounce of power out of the system, and in many cases breaking the system. I do appreciate the reasons to stay pure classed, and that's what I like to do, with just a few exceptions.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, and I don't have a problem with there being some builds that are better than a pure class build because they got very creative and clever and really eked that stuff out. I have a problem with that. I would say that in general, multi-class characters should become more versatile. If a multi-class build is completely outpacing a pure build, there's generally a balance issue there.
Agreed. Agreed.
Our survey question of the week comes from Alexa on Kyber. Guild Renown Decay, how does it work? It will give you a short, as best version as I can. Guild Renown Decay currently doesn't start until level 150.
That sounds right.
It also, news to me recently, does not. If you're level 200, you don't get Guild Renown Decay either.
Yep.
It's only in the intervening part. Now, if someone leaves your guild, you could drop from level 200 down to 199, and then you would be getting Guild Renown Decay. Guild Renown Decay is related to what level you are and how many active players you have. Mm-hmm. So the more active players you have, the more Guild Renown Decay you will get.
Yep.
That's kind of in a nutshell how it works. Anything I should add, or you want to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty much the gist of it, and I think that's accurate.
You can look up the formula. It's on the forum somewhere, I'm sure.
It is.
But I mean, that's kind of the general. Just it's not very complicated in the mechanics. So, a good time to address that. Timely too, because my guild is just.
You guys are 199.
Yeah, we just got to 199. So, getting the final home stretch to get to level 200. So keep plugging away at it. With that, we're going to close out the news portion of the show. Stay tuned. We'll have our discussion on Endgame, then and now, the first part of that coming up. Anything else you want to plug here before we head out?
No, don't want to plug anything. I just want to say that I'm looking forward to the druid changes, and really going to get on hammer Lamania hard on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday.
Don't miss the Duke spot, though.
Well, I'm gonna. I think I'm gonna probably make it, but I'm not gonna promise that this week.
That's okay. So thanks for listening to the show, especially the folks in the chat room hanging out with us today, and thanks to all my other guests for DDOCast and the contributors for that. Standing Stone Games and Wizards of the Coast for making this show happen. And thanks to Cyberbears also for hosting the show. If you'd like to support the show, you can visit our website, DDOCast.com, or you can support us on Patreon. You can hit us up at DDOCast.com for show notes, MP3s, our calendar, previous shows, and other fun stuff. If you'd like to be a part of the show or have a comment on this episode, maybe a question you'd like to hear us answer, or you just want to say hi, you can leave us a comment, or you can email us at DDOCast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media and follow us for the latest cast updates. I'm at DDOCast on Twitter. It's the best place. Our closing tip comes from the Human Cipher on Arganesson. Use the daily dice. Great tip. They're pretty awesome. Stay tuned for our part 1 of our discussion on Endgame Then and Now. But before that, we have a word from one of our sponsors.
This is Billweather Bill with Stormreach Tours, the premier touring company of Zendrick. The same company that took you on an exclusive tour of the traveling troubadours during their visit to House Fjarlin. Are you looking for adventure in new and exciting places? We offer a full slate of travel options for adventurers of all levels in and around the continent of Zendrick, with something for every adventurer to enjoy. We are now offering new and exciting adventures to the land of Barovia through our newly opened Barovian travel office. Travel through the mists to the foreign land of Barovia, a mysterious realm surrounded by a lovely fog and ruled by Count Strahd von Zarovich. Stay in the charming village of Barovia, located in the shadow of Castle Ravenloft, or one of the other local villages. Explore all that Barovia has to offer with our native Vistani travel guides. This is a land of many surprises and wonders, a land of fantastic history and lore, a land of rustic and authentic architecture. Book your adventures today. It is such a unique place to visit, we doubt you'll ever leave. We have with us today Yevgeny Krushkin, one of our Vistani guides, on location in Barovia.
Hello, travelers and adventurers, and welcome to Barovia, the home of the best meat pies this side Mrs. Lovett's homemade meat pies on London's Fleet Street. On this adventure, we take you to the old bone grinder, a rusty, charming old windmill that has been converted into Barovia's popular pie shop. The pies here are so popular that the haggard proprietor, Morgantha, consistently have difficulty keeping up with demand. Patrons be known to camp outside the old windmill to wait for the next batch of fresh pies. It is not uncommon for the lines to exceed those seen when the newest Goodberry phones hit the market, when Morgantha and her two daughters are having difficulty stocking supplies. They stock only the freshest ingredients at Old Bone Grinder Pies. But don't worry, while our representatives wait in line to collect ye pies, we take ye across beautifully constructed ancient stone bridge to nearby forest on the other side of Local Creek. In the forest, ye see Barovian wildlife in natural environment, and view the dancing will-o-wisps through the trees. Also in forest are a set of 4 megaliths on hill, surrounded by exquisitely and naturally carved rock formations. Rumors tell of naturalistic rituals performed on this very spot, similar to Scotland's Stonehenge, but with all the charm and mystique you can expect from the mist-filled Barovian countryside. After that countryside meat pie picnic, we will take ye on exclusive tour inside the old bone grinder windmill and pie shop. That's right, we take ye behind the scenes to see Morgantha's famous meat pies are made. That's experience no other tour company provide. Here, member of tour group that's just ending. Excuse me, Mr. Dwarf, tell us about thy experience. How delicious for those pies. They don't pay me enough to get one for myself.
Well, I've got to say my emotions are a bit mixed on this. On the one hand, it's all savory and flavory, but there's one issue, and that's the pies that are made out of... Well, I'm having a bit of a crisis of conscience here. My tongue doesn't want to say the words because it wants more pie!
Well, that sounds tasty. For all ye adventurers looking to explore finest local food the land of Barovia has to offer, this is the place for ye, and should be on top of every adventurer's must-visit list. Stormreach Tours in Barovia are not responsible for any foodborne illnesses or side effects that can be caused by consuming undercooked meat.
Thanks, Yevgeny. Hey, send us some of those pies. I hear that people have been dying to get into them. Make sure to book this tour today to ensure priority access. And don't forget about our many other tour options. Get lost in the Restless Isles, take a getaway to the Ataraxia's Haven, or look for treasure in the mines of Tethumar. This is Billweather Bill with Stormreach Tours, where we put the adventurer back in your questing. Don't delay, join us for your next questing experience today.
Stormreach Tours is an equal opportunity employer and travel service, open to all races and genders. All adventures are non-refundable after purchase. Stormreach Tours not responsible for pug quality, loot rolls, damage or loss of personal items or platinum, lag, and connection issues, or afflicting conditions such as, but not limited to, injury, mind control, rage quits, disease, curses, amputations, death, or undeath. Welcome. We are talking about Endgame Then and Now. This is going to be a new series for us. I'm your host, Patrick. With me this week, we have our guest, Asheras. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me again. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of this. We also have a new guest, Warcane. Hello, sir.
Hey, nice to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get to know you a little bit here in just a second. But let's see. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself, your play style briefly. Give us the 1 minute version.
Pretty much I'm on Legends of Orion Guild on Orion. Been playing since the release of the game. quit for a year or two, came back. There's just no other game like DDO. So, I mean, I've tried other stuff, and it just brings me back to my pen and paper days. And I just can't seem to stop playing. I mean, I love the game. Love all the different things they do. I'm liking the stuff they're doing lately as far as fixing the game and getting some of the polish in the game. I think a game that's 12 years old should have should be more refined, if you will.
Sure. All right, so like I said, we're going to start a new series today. We're going to be talking about Endgame, then and now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of take a journey through time and go back. We've all been playing for a long while. So we'll be talking about what Endgame used to look like and how and why it's changed into what it is today. And then we'll kind of give some of our thoughts at the end about what it is today and what that kind of what we feel about some of those things. Asheras is going to drive the conversation a little bit more than me today, which will be fun for me. So take it away, sir.
All right, thanks. Well, I think the first thing we want to talk about is just trying to define what is Endgame. So why don't each of you guys just take a minute or so to just kind of describe what you think of when you hear the word Endgame, maybe not as it relates to other games, but as it relates to Dungeons & Dragons Online.
The thing that jumps out to me the most is when you try to define what Endgame is it tends to be, for me, what do you do when you hit XP cap? So you get to currently level 30. That's obviously changed over the years, but when you get to level 30, what do you do next? Ostensibly, it's a little bit of a misnomer now, because ostensibly it kind of has this implication that you've, quote, finished with your character, and then what do you do with the character? But obviously some of the things like reincarnating, and even loot grinding, you're never really done, but that's kind of what Endgame has always meant to me is level cap, what's next? What do I do with this character?
Cool. Warcane, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. Well, you get to level cap, can't really go any further. It's the end of the game. So at that point, what do you do? Look for loot, run raids, try to get completions on the raids to farm the loot that you're looking for to build your character up. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell for this game, I believe.
It's interesting. One thing that I want to jump on my own comment. It's kind of indicative of where the game has gone, and that's like, what do you do with this character, right? Because there's definitely an aspect of what do you do next, and rolling up an alt is an option. You can have build a new character, but that's not really what the end game looks like for most people these days.
Sure, yeah, and I agree with both of what you guys said. I think that Endgame is basically what is there to do? What are the activities? What's enjoyable once you reach that level cap? I think the leveling process is tangible in a lot of ways. There's market progression. Every time you run a quest, you get XP. You see your little bar at the bottom move you further. You get AP to spend. You get new levels, and your character becomes more powerful. And there's that tangible progression through things. So Endgame is kind of what happens once that tangible progression kind of stops. And there are a lot of ways you can improve your character, and continue character progression, even though you're not adding more levels or adding more AP. And that how you do that has changed. But I think basically how you keep making this character different or better is a lot of what Endgame is about. Once you're at level cap.
And that's we'll talk about it, one of the biggest things that's changed about that is reincarnation, which makes it really hard to define Endgame, right? Because we're talking about this idea of you've made it to level cap. Now what do you do? Go back to level 1 and then do it all over again. Which then kind of like, is that really Endgame? Is it not Endgame? But I feel strongly that a reincarnation is something you do as an Endgame, and then you're kind of going through it, and then maybe you exit out of Endgame and then go back and add it. It becomes really weird when you start talking about reincarnation and how that fits into this.
Reincarnation is a unique system, and we'll talk about it more later, I think. But it's kind of unique to DDO, and it does create some opportunities, but also some challenges, I think. So it's an interesting aspect to this game that's kind of makes the end game a little bit harder to define.
Yes.
But in regard to that, let's take a look at what Endgame used to look like and kind of how it's progressed over time. I wasn't actually around until 2008. So, Patrick, Warcane, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about how it was at the beginning back in 2006?
What came out in 2008? I'm trying to remember. Give me a frame reference. What were we running? What raids were we running back then?
Shroud came out in February of 2008, and then the Reaver's Reach came out in July.
Oh man, those were fun times. So way back in the day, level 10 was. I think the game started at level 10 was the cap, and they're actually the only raid was Tempest Spine. But back then, it was really about getting a +1 tome was. Like that was the highest achievement in loot, really. And there was some stuff in obviously Vault of Night, and then as we kind of progressed into Titan, which never really took off. I mean, it kind of did, but there were some challenges to Titan and why it never really became a popular raid. But you had those two, Demon Queen. So there was raiding. And, at the time, raiding meant you ran the only 3 or 4 raids in the game, because, that was all there was, and you were already in that kind of level cap range anyways. But really, it was about, we would be doing runs to get +1 tomes. As strange as that seems now that, you can just hop on the store and buy a +7. And we're looking for +8s now.
I think I've heard too that Vorpal weapons or wounding and puncturing weapons out of Threnel and a couple other places were largely popular.
Yeah, Vorpal was good. There weren't a lot of Vorpals. The only thing back then, Vorpal was proper, and you could only get it on a slashing weapon. So that was the thing. And there were places that you'd kind of go to do that, do this stuff. The giant caves out in Threnel were really popular. Obviously, the raids were pretty popular. I mean, Threnel was essentially the end game. It was an end game chain. CO6 was an end game chain. I don't know, what were you doing, Warcane?
Yeah, we did a lot of the CO6. Second to the last quest in there, you used to run in. You do loot runs on that lava or fire chest in there. You just run in, get the loot, call out, reset it. That was one of the loot runs we used to do. As far as back then, some of the stuff that me and my friends used to go for was Mithril full plate. If you had Mithril full plate, there was no PRR back then, so it was better than normal full plate. And yeah, that was something. And again, the Vorpals, they were rare, really rare. You'd run around and 1 out of maybe 100 people you'd see would have a Vorpal in the beginning of the game. And then when Bonds came out and the raid for that, the CO6 sword, or not CO6, but the SOS sword, when that came out, everybody was trying to farm to get that.
When Giant Hold came out, fortification suddenly became a big scramble, because it was hard to find fortification, actually, back then. A lot of you look at the loot today, and there's a lot of progression with it, and you can get Vorpal stuff down like the level 2 weapons, which is kind of silly. But I mean, back in the time we're talking about, this stuff was really high level loot. It's pretty rare. So you didn't really get a lot of it. Having moderate fortification, which was 75% fortification. That was a big deal. You'd actually Black Anvil Mines or Relical Southern Pass, which we're going to call it. They're the same quest, just different ways of talking about it. But you'd go do ore runs just so you could have a fortification item. That was the one place at the time until Orchard and Minos Legend came out that you could reliably get fortification.
But basically, all of what we're describing is what you would call loot farming. Mm-hmm. So the main progression at this point of the game is to improve your character by getting better gear that makes it easier to run content or faster to run content.
And making more characters. The other thing you had to deal with, too, at this time, that is a relic of of the Sovereign Past. A relic of past. Death penalties. You had to recoup your XP when you died. So you try to do some of these harder runs. I mean, I remember doing Von 3 on Elite back in these days, and I mean, you'd come out of it, and you had to maybe lose almost a whole bubble worth of XP, and you had to regain it. You didn't really lose anything, but you had to like regain it to keep advancing. So it was always something to kind of manage. But then it was a lot of building new characters too, right? Like everyone had 6 or 7 characters at least. So
I
the
agree.
effort, and the effort to cap a character back then wasn't. I mean, you're only going to level 10, even though XP was obviously harder to earn, and as you mentioned, wasn't necessarily permanent either.
right.
Yeah, it seems to me like this era kind of continued as the cap raised from 12 to 14 to 16, and then even up to 20. That whole period there, you had the same sort of, I guess, game mechanics in place, which was level to cap, farm raids, farm
Build a new
unique name
character.
loot, and build a new character and get them up to cap, and the old keep everybody on timer game.
I mean, I've talked about it on the show several times. Like I've got one character every class. That's just kind of how I've mostly always had it. And back then that was true for a lot of people. I mean, some people would make multiple of the same build or whatever, but I mean, it was not uncommon for like the average player probably had 8 to 10 characters back then. At least in the the end game kind of area of people. But there's interesting. You're talking about mechanics of the raid stuff. Like there were some interesting progressions that happened there that were fairly subtle that we take a lot for granted today. Because initially, Vault of Night and Demon Queen, and Titan, you had to run the flagging quest every single time you ran the raid. It wasn't you just reran the raid. So Demon Queen, you had to run Offering of Blood and Wizard King and Chains of Flame and the pre-raid every single time you wanted to run the raid. In Vault of Night, you had to run 1 through 4 before you could run 5 every single time. So we were running those a lot.
And you had to run them in order back in the day too.
Yes. Well, Vault of Night you did. I don't think you had. I don't think you cared for Demon Queen. But Fall of Truth, or not Fall. Sorry, Reaver's Fate. When that came out, there were 2 kind of fundamental changes that happened with that. One is you didn't have to rerun stuff to flag for that. Once you killed the dragons, you were flagged, and that was it. And the other thing that happened was, up until that point, you would get 2. There would be these runes that the leader could pick up, and they would give to 1 or 2 people in the group, depending on who wanted this up. But the raid chest had 2 items in it. It was 2 raid loot items every single time, no more, no less. And someone with a rune could reach in and pull one of those out if it was in your inventory, but only the leader of the party could actually pick them up. And the reason why that changed was because we got to Reaver's Fate, and it was people could solo that. You couldn't really solo the other raids at the time. It was nigh impossible. You could do it now, but so that was a major change, and they made that change so that everyone had a % chance to get something out of the chest. Was what happened. That's when that happened, was around Reaver's Fate, which, if you look at how kind of things progressed in the ratings scene and mechanics, they've actually gone back and made it so you don't have to rerun all those quests, and they haven't. Even now, they've really made the Abbot raid a lot easier and more accessible for people doing reincarnation. That you don't have to get a sigil every single life, and kind of stuff like that. So.
Yeah, it's amazing how many time sinks they put into raiding back then that they don't even bother doing that with the newer raids now. But it used to be the end game. Whatever was current end game had some sort of sizable time investment, and whether it was with Giant Hold acquiring the relics, or like you mentioned with Abbot with getting the sigil pieces and assembling your sigil, a lot of those had components like that, or even something that wasn't a raid like Reaver's Reach. In order to run Stealer of Souls, you had to collect the gems and
every time
go through that process. Yeah, every time. So
yeah, you think the raid timer is inconvenient.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's an interesting. That's another reason why people had multiple characters, was because there were no raid timers. So if you wanted to run, 3 shrouds, or just say you want to run shroud every day, for example, which most people were trying to do, you needed at least 3 characters to do that. So it was and I'm not sure, but I believe Shroud was one of the first raids where there was unbound content in it.
Yeah, because of the ingredients, so you could trade them, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that really created that need to run it multiple times. All right, well, let's move forward a little bit, because all this is very similar, just kind of the mechanics are changing. At Cap 20, though,
well, before we do that,
when,
I think we should stop on Shroud for a moment, because Shroud changed a lot of stuff too, in that before you got to Shroud, I mean, you would run the raids. I mean, Reaver's Fate a little bit, but when you got to Shroud, it really became I don't want to use this term negatively, but you really started getting into that grinding mentality of running the Shroud constantly to get those ingredients. Right? It wasn't just about running a raid until you found that item. It was you ran it constantly every chance you got at that endgame stage to get those ingredients to make more Shroud items.
Yeah. Yeah, Shroud was an interesting raid too, because of how many different phases it had built into it. It was a much more complex raid, and it was a progression raid, where very clearly the concept was you might only be able to get through part 1 initially, or part 1, 2, and 3, and you were able to build weapons or gear, that were just tier 1 and tier 2, and that would hopefully allow you to progress through the raid, finally being able to defeat it at final, all the way through to the 5th part.
I remember really calling out at the end of part 3 because we weren't going to do part 4.
Yeah.
We were scared.
Yep. So when the cap went up to cap level 20, that was also when reincarnation first came into the picture. Warcane, what were your first thoughts when reincarnation was added to the game?
Just get a couple past lives so that I needed, and continue on with my multiple characters. I don't think that way today, but back then was my thought was, okay, I got 20 characters, all different classes, different levels, so I can play with whatever quests I want to do. I'll give them the 20 TR and bring that character back the same. Get a past life that's good for whatever class I'm playing at the moment.
Yeah, I think this was a pivotal time for the game, because the idea of reincarnation, like I said, is not something that exists in a lot of other games, and it creates a different progression system. Up until now, all progression is based on primarily acquiring gear and having alts. But at this point in the game, I think another thing that had changed at this time was the concept of bound to account, right? Is this when that came in?
Ooh, I think that might have been a little later. Oh, I guess. Well, I think the seal scroll shards really were the first thing that was bound to account, if I remember correctly. I mean, there might have been a couple other things, but those were like the things that really stick out in my head as when bound to account really took off, was the seals and shards and grinding those out.
Yeah, because the shared bank came with unlimited and the free to play release. That's when we got the shared bank, which allowed you to have bound to account things, because now you had a way to transfer them. So, and that created an entirely different mechanic as well, and we talk about the balance between a single character and alts, and reincarnation allowed you to continue progression on one character, which could be considered over time to be a detriment to having multiple characters, but then also introducing bound to account mechanics created a benefit wherein different characters can run content and the benefits go to another character in your stable. So I think that had a impact of expanding what you can do at Endgame.
It definitely changed Endgame a lot. And you look at the other things that were happening at that time. Level 20, we had Tower of Despair, which was a different kind of grind. Or they talk about the grind for Shroud, which is like, but grab a bunch of ingredients to be able to craft something. Tower of Despair was much more. One, it had +4 tomes. Woohoo! +4 tomes. But the other thing about that was there were so many rings in that raid that it took forever to get the ring you wanted. Even your 20th completion list would have like 10 rings out of like 30. So before you got your 20th completion list, and it was rare to not get the item you were looking for on a 20th completion list. And then you got this raid, and it was not uncommon to have to run 40 to 60 times to get what you were looking for. I mean, I remember my poor barbarian. The first time he got his 20th completion on Tower of Despair, none of the rings were interesting, and the only tome he had was a charisma tome, +4 charisma tome.
No encrusted ring, huh?
No,
that's a shame.
It was, and then I got to 40th, and the same thing happened. I had a +4 charisma tome and a bunch of rings I knew I was never going to use, and wasn't interested in, anyways. So it was, of course, back then too. The thing we should mention about reincarnation back then too is you lost your tomes. So
that's true.
There was reincarnation came with a cost if you had tomes, so people would maybe not do it, or they would find their tomes and they would reincarnate a couple of times, then eat the tomes and kind of go back. So even when reincarnation came out, it wasn't like we were a lot of people weren't just chain reincarnating their characters all the time. It hadn't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, my personal feeling at the time was that the value of going to the 34 and the 36 point build was great, and the extra build points were huge,
especially from a 28 point build.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of characters were level 28 at that point in your stable. So getting them to a 36 point build was huge, and I tried to do that on all my characters. The idea of really getting completionist on one character, or really worrying about a lot of past lives beyond that, just didn't really seem all that viable. And you mentioned tomes, and it's important to mention because it's something that's only come back very, very recently, like in the last 2 months, or month maybe. But tomes were a big part of Endgame and raiding. It was, the best way, besides the +2 you got for favor, to acquire tomes. And so a lot of people would run raids like Shroud, even though they didn't need anything, or Tower of Despair, even though they didn't need any of the actual loot, just because that was their only real way to acquire the tomes.
Or dopant for Shroud.
Yes, or dopants. That's true. One of the interesting things, too, that we saw happening around the time of Tower of Despair, and a little bit as well with the Reaver's Refuge, was this concept of reusing other content, or providing components and other content that apply to this content. And this is, because the Tower of Despair rings could be upgraded, but the upgrading materials could come from Tower of Despair, or from Shroud, or from Devil Assault. So you had this ability to run a different adventure pack, but still be making progress towards something in another pack.
I mean, they were thematically related, so it kind of made sense from the lore's perspective too.
Sure, yeah, but we talked about the gems though back in Reaver's Refuge, and those there was one out in Manectaroon, there was one in Giant Hold. They placed those, in various places in other content, and that creates a cohesive system in a lot of ways, which was also a relatively new concept at this point, and it was an interesting one.
Well, but it was before free-to-play and adventure packs too, so.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So at that point, when they did that with Reaver's Refuge, it didn't matter. Tower of Despair came out at the same time, but and they also introduced the epic. Epicization of packs as well, which was a big part of new content for quite a while, was creating epic versions of old content like the Vault of Night, or the Sands of Manectaroon, and creating the seal shard scroll system, which is probably one of the more divisive systems they've ever built.
Divisive? I don't know about that. I think everyone pretty much universally says it's too much of a grind.
Yes, yeah. The term infinite grind or non-deterministic grind, is one that a lot people feel differently about. But I know that a lot of players got very frustrated by the fact that no matter how many times you run content, you haven't made any progress. So there's not a feeling of progression with non-deterministic or infinite grinds like the seal shard scroll system, and you're at the mercy of blind luck and loot rolls.
I still haven't found my seal for the bracers out of Last Stand. The bracer seal that dropped out of there, and my it's been so long since I really bothered looking for it. I think it was I needed the shard of the Ring of Spell Storing. Never found that either. I think I saw one ever.
The Ring of Spell Storing also was
desirable.
My desirable that I never got. Yeah. I'm sure there's some sort of literary reference there with Moby Dick and the whale and all, but
Probably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, but it's also an interesting system because it took items that were often found in other areas, and then you were able to upgrade them. And the idea of upgrading things that came from somewhere else is another way to enhance content and to have loot progression that doesn't completely invalidate other content. So in that aspect, it's got some nice design components to it. Just the mechanics of getting it was a little frustrating.
The only thing that was bad about that mechanic was what you said, was indeterminate way. Like you just didn't know you weren't working towards it. You just had to luck out and get it.
Yeah.
So you couldn't build towards it. You weren't ever making progress. It's just, did you get it or not? No. Okay, try again, and again, and again, and again. So.
Yeah, I think there was a thread in the forums earlier this week about someone who was a little frustrated by that, and that comes up from time to time. All right, so where are we at?
I think
with Endgame.
Let's do this. Let's talk about because we need to wrap up this session. So let's talk about the change to when we got from level 20 to 25 and how Epic changed there, and what that looked like, and then I think we can wrap this up and talk about what Endgame looks like now next time.
Okay. Warcane, what do you think? How do you feel like Endgame changed when the cap went to 25 and then to 28?
Well, obviously there's epic material that we didn't have before, and it was pretty tough when it first came out. You didn't have the gear. You didn't have no epic gear. You go into epics, and it's like, wow, it's a shocker.
One of the things that I felt, that I found, I always like new content first and foremost. I think I've said that before on the podcast that, new content is always my most favorite thing to see SSG do. And anytime we talk about what do you want to see in the next year, or what coming up, what should they do, my first answer is always content. That's what makes the game best. But one of the things I felt dramatically, probably for the first time when I was playing the game, was that when the cap went from 20 to 25, and mainly Menace to the Underdark was the only content available at that point, I felt like the game
other epic stuff too, but
we did, but the
it was the only new content at the time.
Yeah, it was the only new content that was, and all the old content pretty much was level 20, and then we when it cap went to 25 though, all the gear in Menace of the Underdark, from the Dun Robar rings and even the Evening Star turn-ins to the actual raid loot and things like that, was all markedly better than most of what we got at level 20. And so I felt like it was the first time I really felt like content had invalidated massively what we had before from a loot standpoint. And that was both exciting in terms of acquiring the new stuff, but also it very quickly became, it gave a feel of, I'm not sure what the right word is to describe it, but it felt more hollow because it felt like it was going to happen again. And then when the cap went to 28, I felt the same thing. And the impermanence of loot and the fact that whereas back in the days of Shroud and Todd, I felt like this loot was going to have value for a long time. And now I was feeling, yeah, it did. But
yeah, but I mean, when Menace and Underdark came out, it really invalidated the chemical weapons out of House Cannith. So those raids enjoyed a very short lifespan.
Yeah.
The other big change that happened at this time, though, I think it's really important to mention, is because we went from level cap up to 25, there were two major things that happened in that time frame, too. One was Epic Destinies. People started grinding out Epic Destiny XP, which is a big thing. That's not as big. It was kind of a burst thing, right? Like, as people were getting it on their characters, right? It became a big focus at the time, but most people, if you've been playing for a while, you've done that. You've gotten that, right? And then the other big thing that happened is Epic became much more accessible because when level cap was 20, Epic was a singular difficulty. It was normal, hard, elite, Epic if it was available. It wasn't Epic, normal, hard, or elite. It was just Epic, and it was hard.
Sure.
I'd say it was probably at least where maybe a little bit below where Epic Elite ended up, but it's a little hard to tell because we got a little power bump as well. But when we went to level 25, Epic became much more accessible to everyone, so you could run Epic content. Whereas before, there was a large portion of the population that just didn't feel comfortable running Epic content because it was much more difficult.
Absolutely. Epic content at cap 20 was a much smaller segment of the population, and the number of people who were capable of soloing a quest on Epic at cap 20 was very small. I think it was mostly limited to a few casters who could sneak into Chronoscope and do some scroll farming. But the idea of actually completing content on Epic, on a solo character was not done.
Not much.
By and large.
It was an achievement.
It was definitely an achievement, yes. Those are good points. You mentioned the Epic Destinies. One of the interesting things about the Epic Destinies and the Destiny spheres was this concept that the XP you were earning for the Destiny was not tied directly to the XP you were earning to level your character. So now you have this other progression system, and even if you were at cap, if you ran a quest and would have gotten XP for it, you wouldn't. Obviously, if your character's at cap, you don't get character XP or class or level progression XP, but you still got Epic Destiny XP. So you could be at cap running content and still get XP.
And often were.
Yeah, and often were. Yeah, because at first you had to fill out however many Destinies there were. I think they've only added one, but there were a lot of them, and their XP amount didn't match up with your character. Each one required about 2 million and some change, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
1.9 or something like that.
Yeah.
The Epic Destiny.
Yeah.
Well, then in level 28, we got Epic Reincarnation and Karma, which Karma was, again, a third kind of XP system that you would be working on simultaneously with your Epic XP and your Destiny XP, potentially. I mean, so there's some stuff that changed there in terms of what you could get in Reincarnating and some things in those ranges. So.
Yeah, and the idea that this is one of the first times that the idea was that you could sit at cap and progress your character in ways beyond just farming loot.
Yep. And I think it is kind of important to note too that the rules changed a little bit when we got to Epic, because you could run when you're running an Epic, there's no power leveling, so that was a major change. You could run with more levels of characters, which helped with some things as well.
I think you also noticed, though, that this, especially when the cap went to 28, it happened at 25, but it happened more so, I think, when it went to 28, and the XP at that point went up to the 8 million limit, because now you had, assuming you had been TRing and you weren't a first life character, you had 4 million XP at this point in heroics, because this is before they bumped it down to 3.8 million, and you needed 8 million in epics. So now you started to see the player base get stretched. Because you would have people running heroic TRs now, and they were in the 1 through 20 range, then you'd have people doing epic reincarnations, and it's somewhere between 0 and 8 million XP in that range in 8 levels. And then you had the people who were at cap, and at this point they'd be running Thunderhome, running those 2 raids, maybe running the new Orchard raid.
Yeah, the raiding scene didn't really change after we went into epics, other than when raid timers came out, which we'll talk about next time. I think on that note, thank you for listening. Join us next time. We're going to continue this conversation and be talking about where Endgame is now, and kind of go into some more specifics about how that's happened and what are some things that drove those changes. I want to thank my guests today, Warcane and Asheras. And if you want to support the show, you can visit our website, DDOCast.com, or you can support us on Patreon. You can also find show notes, past shows, and other stuff on our website. You can also find us on social media and follow us for the latest cast updates. I'm at DDOCast on Twitter. If you'd like to join this discussion, leave us a comment, or you can email us, ddocast@gmail.com. So until next time, may all your attack rolls be crits, all your chest level appropriate, have fun, and don't forget to gather for buffs.